Hi guys, it's Ignacio from Full Stack Creative, and over the next couple episodes we're going to be going over some plugins that I really like, and today we're going to be reviewing the Goodhertz Vulf Compressor. As a side note, if you guys are into any like experimental hip-hop producers like Madlib or Knowledge, you guys are really going to like this.
Now if you want to kick it up a notch,
much more high-powered camera. When you're shooting with this,
Overlapping frequency ranges and using masking. It's an incredibly useful tool. So this is the Wolfe Compressor by Goodhertz. It is a plugin meant to be used in your digital audio workstation. One interesting thing to note about this compressor, as I was doing a little bit more research on it, was that the manufacturers of this compressor were doing a lot of research on the Boss 303 sampler. So if you guys have ever gotten into that part of YouTube that's all like lo-fi beats to chill and study to, the Boss 303 sampler is the lo-fi beats to chill and study to machine. It is the thing that just did that the best, and it was highly popularized by guys like MF Doom and Madlib. So they became really fascinated by the compression behavior that the vinyl simulator of the Boss 303 would impart onto the source material. It wasn't just digitally truncating the audio to where it would sound dull, and it wasn't just adding noise. They noticed that it had this extremely aggressive style of compression behavior that would really change the atmosphere of whatever source material was kind of fed into it. And it got to the point where these guys were just plowing mixes through the 303, and it's become like a very noticeable and like very recognizable kind of like sound or texture. If you're familiar with that genre, I think you will definitely hear it when we start like messing with some of these like examples. So compression can basically be described as automatic volume leveling, so that when your source material, whether it's drums or a vocal, exceeds a certain level, your compressor brings that level down. So the cool thing is that across history, there have been many different ways of manufacturing compressors, mainly with just like a bunch of different types of components, whether it's like a VCA gain reduction cell, tube, opto cells. They all behave very differently, and engineers over the years have found that there are a variety of different applications depending on how the compressor is built. So some react very quickly and very aggressively. These types of compressors have really taken to the school of like rock music, you know, rock and metal music, because they behave very aggressively. They exhibit a very intense characteristic. And some behave very smoothly, very soft, very gentle, and this is really popular for tracking pop vocals, anything like that. In the digital age, you can kind of take that a little bit further, where with a lot of like digital audio processing equipment, I think the name of the game, at least for some of it, is precision. You've got extremely precise, recallable EQs that aren't meant to impart a lot of sonic characteristic, but mainly just clean things up and fix, you know, minor issues. In compression, it's no different. You know, there are compressors that don't exhibit any type of like really notable characteristic, although there are a bunch of digital compressors that are modeled after analog compressors that are meant to try to exhibit that type of behavior at a much lower price point. If anybody's ever seen the difference between what an actual 1176 or LA2A costs versus like a plug-in version, it's pretty astounding. To put it plainly, the two types of compression are the clinical type, like the type of compression that you're not supposed to notice. It's basically compression meant to keep things under control dynamically, and then there's the compression that you're definitely supposed to notice, which is the compression that imparts a vast amount of character, aggression via distortion or intense smoothness or glassiness. That kind of falls under like the creative compression school. The cool thing about the Vulf Compressor by Goodhertz is that it seems to be an extremely creative compressor, for sure. Even by just like taking a look at the UI here, you can kind of tell just by like the control set that it's not really meant to be like a super finicky kind of like, oh, like, do I need like 1.5 millisecond attack time, or do I need to like slow it down or anything like that? Like there's the values of all of the main parameters being like input, output gain, attack and release time are kind of like second fiddle here. Like as you can see, like up here in this corner, it's actually set in this like advanced tab where like when you first open up the compressor, it looks something like this, where it's literally your input gain, your compression amount. So there's not even a threshold or ratio control, which, as many of you might know, is like very pertinent compression information. It's just not there. It's just amount. It's 0 to 100%. These two other parameters, which I frankly have never really seen on something that is billed as like just a compressor. is wow and lo-fi. So wow is meant to represent the unsteady playback of a tape machine, which alters pitch. It makes pitch fluctuate in a like wavy, sort of like fluttery kind of way. And then lo-fi could fall under quite a variety of definitions. Usually it means like some type of like low fidelity signal degradation of some kind, whether it's like, you know, digitally truncating top end off, or whether it's adding intense like tape compression that's like affecting low end in some way. It's there, you know, you just get like a percentage of it, and you get like little clues as to like what it's really doing when you open up the advanced tab. On the right side, we have our output, and then there is a dry wet facility here. It goes from 0 to 100, obviously. You've got your bypass, which is like this little master on off. You've got this little sprinkly dot button here, which basically just means noise. It's meant to, I guess, replicate like the inherent noise floor that's built into a lot of these older units. So when you open up the advanced tab here, boom, shows you your attack and release, a bit more of the advanced controls of what's going on with your wow parameter over here, and then some more advanced controls with what's going on with your lo-fi parameter here. And then I noticed when I was first messing with this, I first noticed the speed and type under the wow advanced and lo-fi advanced sections, and then it kind of clicked for me like, oh, okay, cool. So this is meant to be kind of like emulating like what a tape machine is doing. So you've got speed, which is 78 revolutions per minute, 45 revolutions per minute, 33.3 revolutions per minute, which are like standard tape machine speeds, tape playback, which usually affects top end. It's like one of the easiest things to sort of like immediately recognize about it is that you will notice a loss of top end. And then the type under the lo-fi advanced section, it goes from analog to 1980s digital to 1990s digital. It also includes an external sidechain. Right now, because I don't have anything set to the sidechain, it won't react to it. You can like send external audio to it and have the compressor do like the classic sidechain pumping effect if you want, or if you want to try to use it for a more clinical purpose, I suppose you could do that. There's also your digital reference level, which is basically master output. There's also a high quality mode. Haven't really read about what that does. The difference is not spectacularly noticeable, and I also think it's a little idiosyncratic based on what this compressor sounds like, and we will get into what it sounds like. So now that we've gone over some of the basic parameters and feature set, let's dive in and see what this thing's about. So I've loaded in just like a basic drum loop, kick, crash, hi-hat, snare that was recorded in a room. I'm not sure if it was an actual drum kit or if it was like a VST meant to model a drum kit. All I know is that it's a loop and it's drums. One thing that I sort of noticed off bat about this compressor is that you will really hear what it's doing when you use it with source material that already exists within a space and you simply wish to exaggerate that space. So whether it's a vocal that was intentionally recorded in like a kitchen or a bathroom, and you want to really bring out like that space and put it front and center, and then start placing other elements like in your composition or in your mix, like around or within the space that, you know, the affected audio lives, then it's really amazing for that. So let's take a listen real quick at what the drum loop sounds like dry here. Pretty basic stuff. The compressor is bypassed right now. It does already have some compression on it, but that's kind of like not the point. So now let's flip on the Wolfe compressor and sort of like start poking around and seeing what's up with this thing. So yeah, our input and output are set to unity gain. Our compression is at half. Wow is set to 15. Lo-fi is set to 50. Attack and release times are set to 1x, whatever that means. The wow mix is all the way up. Phase is all the way down. Noise is all the way up. Crunch is all the way down. The tape speed is set to 33.3 revolutions per minute, and the type of the lo-fi modeling is analog. So let's hear what this thing has got going on. Yeah. So you can already hear kind of like a pretty intense amount of like loss and low end, especially if I start like bypassing this. Off the bat, like that was the first two things that kind of like jumped out at me about this thing, were like loss of low end and then the exaggeration of the space that this drum kit was recorded in. You know, people always talk about compression as like a means of getting things to sound like close or closer to you. I love the amount of like distance that in this particular instance, like with just the default preset loaded up, I love the amount of distance that this is putting between like me and the kit, like in the soundstage. Like, let's just start kind of like messing around with some stuff. If I just like jack the compression all the way up, you can definitely hear quite a bit of distortion. That's pretty dope. Cool. Let's bring our lo-fi up too, why not? Yeah, so this thing is just absolutely obliterating all of the top end of this recording, which is really cool sounding. So let's bring the noise down just so we're not like losing any contextual details here. And then yeah, let's just start messing around with like tape speed just because that's one of the things that's like easiest to hear. So as I bring this tape speed back up, you can kind of hear a little bit more top end coming back. And then if I bring the wow all the way up, you can hear a lot of like fluctuation and noise, especially in the cymbals, as you just heard. It gives the cymbals kind of like this ooh, kind of like a slow, fluttery kind of sound. It's really cool. So if I bring the lo-fi down, yeah, that's really cool. Even this just by itself, I think would be like a really, really amazing like parallel compression tool that just behaves in a way where you can kind of like dial it in kind of quickly, because this thing does not put a whole lot of emphasis on like, you know, dialing in your time constants with attack and release. So let me just bring this back. You can start hearing a lot more punch from the kick and snare come through. If I just make my release time super fast. Yeah, you can definitely hear the stick detail, the head of the stick on the hi-hat come out quite a bit. A bit more detail on the hat. So one cool thing that I'd like to point out here, for one, on the interface of like a lot of different compressors. So for example, I'll pull up another one that I use quite often, which is Pro C2 by FabFilter. So I use Pro C quite a bit. As you can see, it's quite a different story. It is extremely detailed. You have your threshold value, you've got your knee value, you've got your ratio control, attack and release displayed in milliseconds. You've got some creative stylistic decisions that you can kind of make with it, where you can choose a style of compression. Like I said, it's meant to model the behavior of different types of compressors. And then you've got like a pretty hefty metering facility, which you can set to different resolutions, whether you want to see like, you know, you want to have like a 9 dB resolution, 18 dB resolution to see exactly the amount of compression that's happening. So this is something that I would probably put more under the like clinically leaning compressors, where you're definitely a lot more like value focused when you are using something like this. But the interesting thing about the Wolfe compressor that I noticed like kind of off bat, because I'm so used to paying attention to like what my meters are doing and what my gain staging is doing, but when you just set it, it just has like these display of like gain reduction via this like white line coming down from the top of this little square. And it's such a small little section here. It's not really meant to be like center stage, as opposed to the amount of like screen real estate that like the metering and the gain reduction illustration interface, I suppose, was on the FabFilter Pro C. I think this is really cool. I think what this is telling you is like, hey man, you know, relax, you've got this, all right? Just like tear this thing up and you'll probably land somewhere really cool. It sort of like begets the question like, but how does it sound though? You know? Oh, another really cool thing about this that I like that I don't really hear in a lot of compressors, especially like the more clinical ones, definitely not. Even the ones that are meant to like exhibit tape compression behavior, is that it has under this type section where where the lo-fi advanced parameters are held. So if I turn the lo-fi up, gonna bring the wow down just a little bit so you can hear what's going on. Let's bring up compression just a little bit. So if I switch to 1990s digital or 1980s digital even, I think it's a little bit more intense. Yeah, so one cool thing to note about this here, and this is something that I always wondered, especially listening to like old like Knowledge Bandcamp releases, the kind of like bit crushed kick sound that a lot of them were getting, and it was like it was something that's extremely hard to like reproduce with like just like any bit crushing tool. It's very like dynamically sensitive, and I think this is highly indicative of like the amount of time they spent modeling like the hardware behavior of the 303. I think that's so cool. When you're using like a plug-in chain to attempt to recreate how a piece of hardware behaves, all you can really do is go off of like, you know, go off of what you hear and go off of what you feel. And these guys, I think, really did a tremendous job of figuring out like what the actual compression algorithm of the tool was doing. So yeah, I think that's like super cool. I love the little like bit crushy kind of sound. I think this would be like amazing on overheads, actually. I think that'd be like a really cool idea to take this and just use it on like the overheads, the two overhead mics, or like a room mic or something, to like take an otherwise like pristine sounding drum kit and sort of add this little bit of like, oh, like what the hell is going on there? Kind of, interesting sampling or sampler-ish type of compression. So yeah, if we turn up the crunch of the lo-fi, it starts to exaggerate the bit, the like bit reduction or like digital truncation of the modeling, and it changes a little bit from style to style. So like on the 90s when it's like a little bit punchier, it's like a little bit bigger, a little bit more, I don't know, just like a little bit more 90s. The drums were a little crazy back then. And then if you go to analog, the crunch is definitely more of like a tape behavior where you can hear the low end starting to like flutter and it starts to push the rest of the recording kind of like out of the way. You can really hear it in the cymbals too. But yeah, so what's really tight about this control set is that it feels very fluid, the way that the different controls respond to the changing parameter values. I could have like a perfectly set parameter value across like all of my parameters here and start to just change like maybe like input gain, and then everything will sort of like start to mold and start to change. So I think it's something that kind of beckons you to naturally explore like a new course, chart a new course, like when you're kind of like sculpting out sounds. I think this thing is like a really, really fantastic drum compressor. I think it would be great on any type of like auxiliary percussion. Like I said, anything that exists within a room that you would like to exaggerate. However, I did try it on vocals that were recorded in a booth. It felt a little underwhelming just because the vocals were recorded in such a clean, tight space that there really wasn't anything for the compressor to like bring out. It was just like this sort of like super tight, solid, like over compressed kind of sound. And the distortion and the lo-fi and the wow and stuff like that was really cool. Probably not something I would reach for in a typical like vocal mixing session. Even if I was trying to like add a little bit of like vibe to it, I might find myself eating my words like once I start to implement this thing a little bit more. This thing, it really reminded me of like when I first started like producing, when I would just like start throwing on all of these like effects and all of this like saturation and distortion and heavy compression on drums, and I was just like, sounds sick. And yeah, it kind of put me back in a place where like I know a little bit more about gear, I know a little bit more about compression behaviors and stuff like that, and it just put me in like the whole like that sounds sick kind of like mentality again, which was a lot of fun. So I would say Goodhertz as a company for this compressor specifically have definitely geared this towards lo-fi hip-hop kind of crowd. Although I do think that if you work in any type of music that incorporates like a lo-fi hip-hop aesthetic in a hybrid sense, that you would definitely find a lot of use out of this. Producers that are always wondering like, oh, like how do I get that like lo-fi beats to chill and study to kind of thing going on. This is definitely like the lo-fi beats to chill and study to button for sure. They should just rename this the lo-fi beats to study and compress. Any type of like say like indie rock that is going for more of like a lo-fi response or vibe or whatever, this thing would work really well. One thing to keep in mind too is that I think this thing would really, really slay on some guitars if you're going for kind of like this like Mac DeMarco, Tame Impala kind of a sound with, especially with like the wow, like the fluttery pitch thing we were talking about earlier. It's like become super popular, like kind of like in that lane, and I think you would get definitely a lot of use out of it for sure. The Vulf Compressor costs $150, but we found this really cool section when we were kind of like reading about it and poking around in their frequently asked questions, that they do this little promo offer where if you make a beat or any type of production and you use the compressor on a part of it and you upload the beat to SoundCloud or YouTube with the settings that you used and you tag them, you get 50% off, which I think is really cool. I think that sort of like encourages people to try it, and it's not just like a try it for 15 days and then we're just gonna lock you out kind of a thing. It's it gives you like 15 days to sort of like poke around with it, make something with it as you naturally would on a plugin demo, and then upload it, which sort of is encouraging you to throw your creation out there into the world. And they'll just give you 50% off, $75 for what I think is a really stellar compressor that people would get a lot of like creative use out of. So would I get this thing? I totally would. And one reason why is that for my specific style of production, I don't really like to start productions like in a vacuum. I think one thing that really helps me start to like get going is to put things, it just creates some type of atmosphere, some type of environment where like when I press play, it's not just nothing. You know, if I press play, even if there's not a single note, there is like some type of atmosphere going on. You know, I like to sort of set the stage with like, is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Am I inside? Am I outside? Does it sound claustrophobic? Does it sound big and open? Am I at the Sydney Opera House? Am I in a closet somewhere begging to get out? When you're creating a lot of these types of like atmospheres, it really helps to like exaggerate them, and compression is the perfect tool to do so. So I'll usually reach for like more clinical sounding compressors, or just like middle of the road clinical and creative compressors like the Pro C to hype up my ambiances and stuff like that. I would get, or I am going to get, a lot of use out of the Wolfe Compressor, and like how instantaneously it will just place something in a really, really fascinating space and start to make the rest of your arrangement fit within that little universe, or explode out of it in another section or something like that. I think tools like this are absolutely indispensable when it comes to getting ideas out really, really, really quickly. Especially when your production or your composition is like in its infancy, when you're just starting it. Whether or not something sounds smooth or sad or angry or hurt or something like that, it really affects the way that you start to implement melodic content into your composition. And I love equipment, whether hardware or software, that sort of affects the course of that rabbit hole kind of thing that starts to happen when you get captured by an idea. So, Wolfe Compressor, would recommend, am going to buy for half off. This has been Ignacio. Whoa. Whoa there. I've been Ignacio my whole life. And this has been the Wolfe Compressor. If you like the review and you feel as though I might have something that I can add to what you're doing, all of our Indie Pro members get a production concierge service where for $30 an hour, I can give you some direct advice on the composition that you're working on, any of your productions, any of your beats, mixes, anything like that, or I can just produce a track for you custom outright. There is a link below where you can fill out a form and I can give you a quote on the work. And please make sure to like and subscribe.